Something about this moment is not random. You didn't just click on this, you were pulled here. You didn't expect this message to find you today, but it did. And before you dismiss it, there is something you need to understand. This is not just another motivational speech. This is a turning point in how you see yourself. For a long time, you've been the one who held everything together. When others broke down, you stayed steady. When situations collapsed, you adapted. When people walked away, you kept moving forward as if nothing could really shake you. But here is the truth you rarely say out loud. You've always been strong, until now. Because something is changing in your inner world. Something subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. The way you used to handle everything with control doesn't feel as effortless anymore. The certainty you once had about your strength is beginning to shift. And you may not realize it yet, but this is not weakness. This is preparation. There is an encounter approaching your life, an experience, a presence, a situation that will not fit into your usual understanding of strength. It will not come to destroy you. It will come to reveal you, because not everything that challenges you is an enemy, and not everything that shakes you is a threat. Some things arrive to reorganize who you think you are. And when it happens, you will understand why everything before this moment had to prepare you for it. Something stronger is entering your path, and nothing will feel the same after that. The life of the strong one. You have lived a life most people would never fully understand. Not because you are special in a way that makes you above others, but because you were forced into a role you never asked for. The role of the one who stays standing, no matter what falls apart around them. Over time, people started to see you as the strong one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't break. When something went wrong, they came to you. When emotions ran high, they leaned on you. When chaos entered their lives, you became the stability they could hold on to. And slowly, without noticing, you became everyone's support system, while having almost no one to support you in return. You learned how to stay composed even when you were overwhelmed, how to smile when you felt exhausted, how to give advice when you were quietly struggling with your own answers. Strength became your identity, but it also became your isolation. Because being strong does not always mean being understood. In fact, the stronger you appeared, the less people asked if you were okay. They assumed you were fine. They assumed you didn't need anything. They assumed you could handle it all. So you did. You adapted. You survived. You kept going. But there is something no one sees. The moments when everything goes quiet and your mind finally speaks. The weight you don't show anyone. The emotional fatigue you learned how to hide so well that even close people would never suspect it's there. You didn't become strong because life was easy. You became strong because you had no choice. And in that strength, something else formed quietly underneath it. Loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who only know the version of you that never falls apart. That is the paradox of your life. You are respected but rarely understood, needed but rarely supported, admired but rarely seen. And still, you kept going, because that is what the strong one does. But what no one told you is this. When you are always the strongest in every room you enter, life eventually brings you something that changes that balance. Something that does not ask you to carry others, but asks you to finally face yourself in a completely different way. The turning point, something feels different. At first, it is not obvious. There is no dramatic event, no clear warning, no sudden collapse. It begins in a quieter way, the kind of shift you almost dismiss as just a phase. But deep down, you feel it. Something is different. The same situations that you used to handle effortlessly now feel slightly heavier. Conversations that once felt predictable now carry an unusual tension. Even your own thoughts don't move with the same certainty they used to. It's subtle but persistent. You start noticing that your usual patterns don't give you the same results. The strategies that once kept everything under control don't feel as effective anymore. It's not that you are failing. It's that something around you has changed, and you can't quite explain what. There is a growing discomfort in the background of your life. Not pain exactly, not chaos, but a kind of internal alertness, like your mind is quietly preparing for something it cannot yet see. You try to ignore it and continue as usual. You return to your habits. You stay in your role. You keep being the strong one. But even that identity starts to feel slightly different in your hands, like it doesn't fit as perfectly as it used to. And then comes the strange part. Moments where you feel observed by life itself. Not in a physical sense, but in a symbolic way, like something is aligning in the background, moving pieces you cannot see yet. You begin to sense that this is not random, that something is approaching your path, not loudly, not violently, but with intention. And the more you try to stay in control, the more you realize control is not the point anymore. This is not a collapse. This is a transition. Because somewhere ahead of you, beyond your current understanding, there is an encounter forming. A presence, a situation, a shift that will not just challenge your routine. It will challenge the version of you that believes it already understands everything about strength. And that is when you realize the stability you once relied on is no longer the same. Something is moving closer, and it is going to change the direction of your life in a way you cannot yet prepare for. The prophecy of encounter. What you're sensing is not confusion. It is recognition before understanding. Because at the center of everything you've been feeling lately, there is one truth slowly rising into awareness. You are about to meet someone who will shift the way you understand strength. Not someone who comes to compete with you. Not someone who arrives to challenge your ego. And not someone who exists to take anything away from you. But someone who exists to reveal something in you that has remained unseen until now. This is the kind of encounter that does not announce itself with noise. It arrives quietly, but its impact is undeniable. It doesn't destroy who you are. It disrupts the illusion that you are already finished becoming who you are meant to be. And strangely, part of you resists this idea. Because if you have always been the strong one, what happens when strength is no longer a fixed position you hold, but something you must continue to grow into? There is a tension forming inside you now. One part of you feels cautious, defensive, protective of everything you have built. That part says, I don't need anything or anyone to change my path. But another part of you, quieter, deeper, more honest, feels something else. Curiosity, a strange pull toward the unknown, a sense that whatever is coming is not here to weaken you, but to expand you beyond the limits you have unknowingly accepted. This is where the shift begins, because true transformation does not come from comfort. It comes from contact with something that cannot be reduced to your current understanding. And yes, this encounter is inevitable. Not because it is predetermined in a rigid way, but because growth always reaches a point where the familiar version of strength is no longer enough to contain who you are becoming. You will feel it before it fully arrives, in thoughts that linger longer than usual, in moments of reflection that feel deeper than necessary, in an unexplained anticipation that follows you even in silence. Fear will try to interpret it as danger. Curiosity will recognize it as invitation. And somewhere between those two forces, your life will begin to reorganize itself around something you cannot yet see, but will soon meet face to face. The psychology of being the strongest until now. There is a hidden psychology behind being the strongest person in your environment for too long. At first, it feels like an advantage. You become the one who can handle pressure, the one who doesn't panic, the one who keeps everything together when others fall apart. People start to rely on you without question, and slowly, that role becomes your identity. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who became strong, and start thinking of yourself as someone who is strong by default. But something subtle happens in that process. Strength, when it is constantly used without resistance, begins to lose its direction. You are always enduring, always adapting, always carrying, always solving. And because you are the one who holds everything together, there is rarely anyone strong enough or willing enough to hold you. So your strength grows in one direction, endurance, not expansion, not challenge, not reflection, just persistence. And persistence without opposition slowly becomes limitation. Because without contrast, strength cannot measure itself. Without resistance, it cannot evolve. Without something that truly pushes against it, it begins to repeat itself instead of transforming. This is the paradox no one teaches you. When you are always the strongest in the room, you are also the least tested version of yourself in that room. And that creates a silent stagnation, not in what you can do, but in what you have not yet discovered about yourself. You begin to operate from habit instead of discovery, from responsibility instead of exploration, from expectation instead of curiosity. And you don't notice it because life still works. You still function. You still succeed. You still survive. But deep inside, something remains unactivated, a part of you that has never been fully challenged. This is why the encounter matters, because meeting someone stronger is not about losing status. It is about breaking the illusion that strength is something fixed. It forces a deeper realization. You are not the final version of your strength, you are only the current expression of it. And when that truth enters your awareness, something important begins to shift. You stop seeing strength as a position to defend and start seeing it as a path to evolve. That is why this meeting is not a threat. It is a mirror that shows you where your strength ends and where your real growth begins. The arrival energy, when everything changes, it does not arrive like a storm. It arrives like a shift in atmosphere. At first you cannot name it. You only feel it in fragments, small moments that don't seem connected, yet quietly point in the same direction. Something new is entering your space. It could be a person, a situation, a path you didn't expect, or even a series of coincidences that begin to align too precisely to ignore. But what makes it powerful is not what it is. It is what it does to you internally. You begin to feel slightly unsettled in moments where you used to feel certain. Your usual emotional balance feels interrupted. Not broken, but adjusted in ways you cannot fully explain. There is a strange duality forming inside you. One part of you tries to dismiss it, to label it as coincidence, to return to normal and continue as before. But another part of you recognizes it instantly. Something is here. And this recognition creates tension, because your identity as the strong one is built on stability, on knowing how to respond, how to adapt, how to stay composed no matter what enters your life. But this time, your inner system does not respond with clarity. It responds with curiosity and resistance at the same time. You may notice yourself overthinking more than usual, replaying moments, reading between lines that didn't seem important before, feeling drawn towards something you cannot logically justify. This is where the conflict begins. Ego wants to remain in control. It wants to categorize everything, to maintain hierarchy, to stay in the familiar position of being the one who understands. But growth does not operate within those limits. Growth introduces uncertainty. And uncertainty is exactly what you are feeling now. You will not fully understand it at first. In fact, trying to understand it too quickly may only create more confusion. Because this is not meant to be decoded immediately. It is meant to be experienced. And slowly, almost without noticing, your perception begins to adjust. You start becoming aware that this presence or shift is not random. It is positioned, timed, aligned with something deeper in your life path. And even though you cannot see it clearly yet, one truth becomes undeniable. You are approaching a moment of contact. A moment where what you have always known about yourself will meet something that exists beyond your current limits. And long before the meeting happens, you will feel it approaching you. The first encounter, the mirror effect. And then it happens, not with warning, not with preparation, not in the way you imagined. It simply enters your reality. At first it feels ordinary. A moment, a conversation, a presence, a situation, something that doesn't immediately reveal its weight. But something in you reacts before your mind can explain it. There is an instant internal pause, like time has slightly adjusted itself around this encounter. You are still the same person, still carrying the same identity, the same awareness, the same strength you have relied on for so long. But something is different now. Because in front of you, or within this moment, you are no longer alone in that space of strength. There is something else. Something that does not compete with you, but subtly reorganizes the way you perceive yourself. This is not a battle of superiority. There is no visible competition, no need for comparison in the external sense. And yet internally, something shifts. You feel it before you can explain it. This presence, this person, this energy, this mirror does not need to prove anything. And that is exactly what unsettles something deep inside you. Because your strength has always been measured through response, through adaptation, through control, through being able to handle whatever comes. But here, control is no longer the center of the experience. Awareness is. And for the first time in a long time, you are not analyzing how to manage the situation. You are observing yourself within it. That is the beginning of the mirror effect. You start noticing things you don't usually notice. The pace of your thoughts, the subtle shifts in your confidence, the way you try, almost instinctively, to reassert your internal balance. But it doesn't fully stabilize the way it normally does, because something about this encounter does not allow your usual structure of identity to remain untouched. And then comes the realization that creates the real internal shock. This is not someone trying to be stronger than you. This is someone whose strength expresses itself differently. Calmer, deeper, less reactive, less dependent on external validation. Not louder, but more rooted. And in that difference, something unexpected happens. Your definition of strength begins to loosen. Not collapse, but expand. Because for the first time, you are confronted with the idea that strength is not a single dimension you mastered long ago. It has layers you have not fully explored. And this realization destabilizes something essential, not your power, but your certainty about your power. Ego reacts first. It tries to categorize, it tries to measure, it tries to regain its familiar position. But underneath that reaction, something quieter begins to form. Awareness. A recognition that what you are experiencing is not a threat to your identity, but the beginning of its transformation. And as the moment continues, you understand something without needing words. You have not met a rival. You have met a reflection of what strength can become when it is no longer confined to what you already know. The inner collapse of old identity. What happens next is not visible to anyone else. There is no external collapse, no dramatic breakdown, no moment that the world would recognize as change. But inside you, something begins to reorganize itself at a deeper level. The foundation of an identity you have carried for a long time starts to loosen. Not because it was false, but because it was incomplete. The belief that you are the strongest, the one who can handle anything, the one who always finds a way, the one who never truly falls apart, does not disappear instantly. Instead, it is questioned, quietly at first, then repeatedly. Because after the encounter, your mind cannot return to the old version of certainty it once relied on. Something has been introduced into your awareness that does not allow you to see strength in the same narrow way anymore. And that creates discomfort, a subtle but constant internal friction. You notice yourself thinking differently, replaying moments from the encounter, interpreting your own reactions, trying to regain the mental position you once held so naturally. But it doesn't fully lock back into place, because something in you already knows. You have seen another expression of strength, and now your old definition feels less absolute. This is where resistance begins. The ego does not collapse easily. It defends, it justifies, it tries to restore hierarchy inside your mind. You are still strong. You are still the one who handles things better than others. This moment doesn't change anything. But even as those thoughts appear, they do not feel as solid as before, because awareness has already expanded beyond them. And expansion always creates tension before it creates peace. There may be moments of emotional discomfort, brief waves of doubt, reflection, even vulnerability that you are not used to acknowledging. Not because you are becoming weaker, but because you are no longer able to ignore what you now perceive. You are seeing yourself from a wider angle. And that wider view makes the old identity feel smaller, not because it was wrong, but because it was limited. Eventually, something begins to soften. Not instantly, not forcefully, but gradually. The need to defend the old identity begins to fade, and in its place, something more stable starts forming. Not certainty about being the strongest, but awareness that strength itself is not a fixed position. It is a living process, and as this understanding settles deeper, the internal conflict begins to shift from resistance to reflection, from defense to observation, from identity protection to quiet acceptance that you are no longer who you were before this encounter. And in that acceptance, something important happens. The ego loosens its grip, not because it lost, but because it no longer needs to hold on so tightly to something that has already begun to evolve beyond it. The revelation, strength was never the goal. After the internal noise settles, something unexpected begins to emerge. Not confusion this time, not resistance, clarity. But it does not arrive loudly. It arrives like something that was always there, but only now becomes visible. You start to realize something that changes the entire meaning of what you have experienced so far. Strength was never the goal. Not the kind of strength you were taught to value. Not endurance alone, not control alone, not the ability to carry everything without breaking. Those were only expressions, only fragments, only survival tools that helped you move through what life required of you until now. But they were never the destination. Because real strength is not a fixed state you arrive at. It is awareness, the ability to see yourself clearly while you are moving through life, instead of only reacting to it. It is adaptability, not in the sense of surviving change, but evolving with it without losing your inner center. It is emotional intelligence, the capacity to understand not only what happens to you, but what happens within you because of it. And suddenly, everything begins to reframe itself. The encounter you experienced, the presence that unsettled your identity, the mirror effect that destabilized your certainty. It was never about comparison. It was about awakening. Because meeting someone who expresses strength differently does not reduce you. It expands the definition you have been living inside. It shows you that what you called strong was only one layer of something much larger. And in that realization, a deeper truth becomes clear. You were not placed on a path to remain the strongest version of yourself. You were placed on a path to continue becoming. This is why the experience felt inevitable. Why it felt like something approaching rather than something random. Because growth in its truest form is not accidental chaos. It is guided adjustment. Life does not always introduce change to destroy your stability. Sometimes it introduces it to correct your direction, to expand your perception, to refine your awareness. And what you once interpreted as challenge or disruption was actually alignment. The meeting, the reflection, the discomfort, the inner shift, it was all part of a process that was never meant to leave you where you started. It was meant to move you beyond it. And now, as this understanding settles in, something inside you stops resisting. Not because everything is fully understood, but because it no longer needs to be. You are no longer trying to preserve an identity. You are beginning to understand the process of becoming. And in that understanding, strength is no longer something you defend. It is something you continuously discover. Integration, becoming a new version of yourself. What comes after revelation is not noise, it is integration. This is the stage where everything that once felt intense begins to settle into something quieter but far more stable. You are not the same person who first heard the idea of meeting someone stronger than you. And you are not the same person who felt their identity begin to shake in that encounter. Something has changed at the foundation level, but not in the way your ego once feared. You did not lose your strength. You refined it. Because what you once called strength was often tension, holding everything together, staying in control, pushing forward no matter the internal cost. It worked, yes. It carried you through many things. But it also came with weight you did not always acknowledge. Now something different is forming. A quieter kind of strength, one that does not need constant validation, one that does not rely on comparison, one that does not panic when challenged because it no longer sees challenge as a threat to identity. Instead, it sees it as information, as feedback, as expansion. You begin to notice small but important shifts within yourself. Situations that used to trigger resistance now create reflection instead. Emotional reactions that once felt automatic now feel observable. You are no longer fully inside every reaction, you are also aware of it while it happens. And that awareness changes everything. Because where there was once ego struggle, there is now space. Space to pause. Space to understand, space to choose your response rather than being consumed by it. This is where humility begins to take root, not as self-diminishment, but as clarity. You no longer need to position yourself as the strongest in the room because the need for that position has dissolved. In its place comes wisdom, the understanding that strength is not a fixed identity you defend, but a living process you participate in. And with wisdom comes balance, not emotional suppression, not overreaction, but alignment. A more stable internal center that does not swing between pride and doubt, but remains grounded in awareness. And slowly, something else appears. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding challenges, but the kind that remains even when challenges appear. Because you are no longer interpreting every experience as a test of who you are. You are seeing it as part of who you are becoming. And in that shift, the internal struggle that once defined your growth begins to fade. Not because life becomes easier, but because your relationship with life has changed. You are no longer fighting to maintain an identity. You are allowing yourself to evolve beyond it. And in that evolution, you finally realize becoming a new version of yourself was never about losing what you were. It was about finally outgrowing the limits you once believed were permanent. And now, everything comes into perspective. What you experienced was never meant to break you. And it was never meant to place you in a position of defeat or comparison. What you met was not an enemy. It was your next level, because life does not always introduce new strength by giving you more comfort. Sometimes it does it by showing you a version of strength you have not yet fully embodied, a reflection that feels unfamiliar at first, but deeply intentional in its timing. And now you understand something important. You were never being replaced. You were being expanded. The encounter, the discomfort, the inner shift, it was all part of a process that was guiding you beyond the limits of your previous identity. And as you move forward from this moment, you will not return to who you were before. You will carry awareness with you, a deeper understanding of strength, a quieter confidence that does not need to prove itself. So if you ever feel challenged again, remember this. It is not a sign that you are becoming weaker. It is a sign that you are being invited to grow again. Because your path does not end with being strong. It continues with becoming stronger in ways you have not yet imagined. And this is only the beginning of your next chapter.